back. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.
Don't need money, don't take fame, don't need no credit card to ride this train. It's strong and it's sudden and it's cruel sometimes.
Little Huey Lewis in the news as we're talking money here on this episode of Boomer Life with our guests from Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy and proposal administrators. In studio is Brett Luckin, a trustee, and Nicole Clarke, who is an estate manager and insolvency counselor with Abakhan and Associates. We've been talking about, well, all of the two main remedies for getting out of debt, particularly as administered by trustees like Abakhan and Associates. They are the consumer proposal and, of course, the dreaded bankruptcy. And Nicole pointed out just before the break that in terms of one's credit history, the consumer proposal will have less impact than the bankruptcy, but Brett was also pretty quick to add the voice of experience here. By the time you get to sit down with a proposal administrator and a trustee, you probably pretty much had the biscuit in terms of the bad letters, the credit calls,
Yes.
all of those people. The negatives have been pretty fierce, and so there's probably not much stuff to the credit rating anyway. But people seem to want to hang on to that for some reason. Brett.
People, yeah, you know what? I still see people who come and see me who are making the minimum payments.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the bizarre reality in that you can, in fact, make your minimum payments $10 a month, $20 a month, $100 a month on a $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 credit card, and you will retain your good credit rating.
True.
And in fact, you may well even get credit cards in the mail offering you another $5,000 you can't afford to repay.
Right.
And the moment you file a proposal or bankruptcy in those circumstances, yes, your credit rating will take a hammering. But by and large, most of the people who come and see someone like us have already defaulted, missed a few payments, getting the collection calls, had a car seized, whatever it might be. And in those circumstances, you're not saving anything. In fact, what you're in fact doing is creating a new start for yourself.
Absolutely. And I should probably have taken a moment and pointed out, because we haven't said it specifically on this program, Brett, although you and I have talked about it in the past. Once you retain the services of Abakhan and Associates, all of the nasty business stops, and it has to stop because you can make it stop,
Yeah.
right?
There's a stay of proceedings which immediately comes into place when you file a bankruptcy or proposal. And what that stay of proceedings means is that everything from the soft collection stuff like the letters and telephone calls right across to even if you were due in court tomorrow for some kind of garnishment hearing, or if you already had a garnishment that was already taking chunks of your wages, all of that would freeze. And all communications now actually go through your trustee in bankruptcy. People stop calling you and they deal with us.
Right. And even if they try to get through and persist in calling, you get to say, call my trustee.
Yes, you
Click.
get to say call your trustee. And in fact, what will happen is if that there are a couple of the less reputable guys, less savory types who continue to call you, we will sometimes pick up the phone and phone them and say, hey, that's not on, you don't do it anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the wolf can be made to go away from the door.
Yes.
Well, and that's an enormous. Nicole, you talk to these people first. In many cases, they're pretty stressed out. They're they're really, as Brett said earlier, at the end of their tether.
Absolutely, yes. And these creditors will call you at work repeatedly. They'll call your family members, and it's really difficult for people. They say all sorts of nasty things to try and get people to pay.
I think it's the threats, Brett.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're not going to come through here, then we'll tell you. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about this whole business. Well, I don't want to talk to a trustee. I don't want to go bankrupt. It'll be in the paper tomorrow for crying out. Well, no, it won't.
No.
But these credit collection people, they know how to wait. They know how to press the fear buttons on beleaguered consumers.
Yes.
They can scare the pants off you with some of those phone calls.
I've had people phone me and say, the collectors are telling me they're going to call my boss.
Yes.
They're going to tell my boss I owe them money. And I've had other people say, that the collection agency is calling me at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he says he's going to send someone around today to take my car away. It's incredible the kind of stuff they will come up with.
Right.
And really for no other reason than just to stir up that fear, to agitate you.
Right.
And there was a lady I remember who phoned me from, I think it was Quadra Island, and she was being told by a credit collection agency that she should get her father to bail her out. And she'd made the mistake in some conversation where she'd indicated that her dad had a little bit of money, And based on that, they had latched onto that and were putting huge pressure on her to get a loan from her dad.
Really?
Which is, of course, the last thing she wanted to do.
Of course.
Right. Drag him in on it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, that kind of opens an interesting door, because we've talked about this in the past, Brett. And Nicole, it's good to have you with us for this conversation as well. And we usually don't get to it until with 2 minutes left in the hour. So we're getting at it much earlier this time. And this is Boomer Life. And we're talking now specifically to boomers and the kinds of trouble we can quite innocently fall into when we try to do nice things for people in our lives. For example, and Brett, you've got a great story from the young man in the truck, and I want you to tell us that story.
It's
the kid in the
story.
pickup truck, the kid who went to work in the oil fields and bought a hugely expensive truck. What happens is, and we do it as parents, we do it as uncles and aunts, and we particularly do it as grandparents. And that is, Grandpa, can you? I'm gonna buy a new car. Dad says he won't co-sign, but I don't have all the money. Grandpa, can you co-sign? Come on, give me my start in life. Blah blah blah. And of course, all we want to do is help the little nippers along. We've been doing it all their lives. So what the heck if they're old enough to be responsible for themselves financially? What the heck? Let's give them a leg up anyway. And Brett, we co-sign for all sorts of situations.
Yes. In fact, the situation you're referring to was a gentleman I met in his mid to late 60s in a Starbucks in my travels.
Okay.
In Kelowna, and he had very little debt. He was single. He was earning about $2,000 a month, and he was doing okay. He was trundling along. Only owed about $3,000 on a single credit card, so no real debt of significance, except that what he had done 6 months previously is he had co-signed for his grandson, who got a big job in the oil fields in Alberta, co-signed for his grandson for a $42,000 Ford something or other.
Oh, boy.
And unfortunately, with the oil price doing what it did, the grandson lost his job.
Right.
And he brought all the paperwork with him to the meeting, and it actually turned out, as I was reading through it, that it became clear that, in fact, it wasn't even a co-signatory issue. In fact, Granddad was the one who signed for the loan.
So he was on the hook for $42K?
He was on the loan. He was on the loan on his own.
Wow.
In fact, the grandson didn't even actually sign for the debt. So now, of course, grandson can't repay. The debt has now gone into default, and as a result of that, the bank is now phoning. And of course, the person the bank is calling
is the person who's on the loan.
Is the person who's on the loan, who's the granddad, right? And he couldn't afford $42,000.
Well,
completely
who can?
Impossible.
Yeah, right.
And so now he's asking me, what does he do? And of course, this is a prime situation that happens all the time. You don't just see it on cars; you see it on homes where the older generation says, "Oh well, I'll remortgage my house,"
right?
Or I will co-sign for my kids on the home, a wedding present or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge with that is that you are not in control. You, the older person, are not in control of the debt you co-signed. And as a result of that, when that debt goes awry, you have no control of that. I mean, your grandson may lose his job.
As was the case with the kid working in Fort McMurray.
Yeah,
of course.
A medical issue may occur to your children, which results in them being unable to repay the debt.
Right.
And so what ultimately happens is that people don't really, I think, process this through in their heads, is that when you co-sign on a debt, you have to do it as if it's yours.
Right.
Could you afford to pay this debt back if you had to do it yourself?
And I don't think most of us get past the flattery of being asked to help this lovely young person out. It's her first car. She just graduated from university. Grandpa, would you help me co-sign my own and get my start in life and my first new car? I'd love to. I could. Nothing would make me happier. And off she goes on her first job in her nice little car and all the rest of it. Well, all you did was emotionally respond and welcome an opportunity to do a nice thing for a person you've loved since the first time she drew a breath. Right. Your granddaughter. Come on. So, of course, you're going to respond emotionally and positively when she flatters you by asking you. And all you're suggesting, Brett, is none of your response is wrong, provided you also took the time to do the math.
Yeah. Can you actually afford to repay that debt? And of course, there are so many other things. In this particular case, the gentleman I met in Kelowna had a great credit rating his entire life, had never defaulted on a single debt. And as a result of this particular situation, suddenly, much later on in life, which I suppose was fortunate for him in that it wasn't like he was considering buying another home or getting credit for another car or anything like that. But later on in life, for the first time, through no fault of his own, ultimately, his credit rating would have gone through the floorboards.
Of course, yeah. Interesting stuff. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about how some of this gets started. There was a piece in one of the Vancouver papers yesterday. It was entitled, Know the Real Cost of Your Car. Because I know there are more than a few people listening to that story about the granddad and his grandson in Alberta going, what does a 20-year-old kid need with a $42,000 car or truck in the first place? Well, it's just awfully darn easy to buy one.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that when we come back on Boomer Life on CISL 650.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.